The musty scent of aged paper filled Anna's nostrils as she opened another cardboard box from her grandmother's attic. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, casting an almost ethereal glow over the collection of memories she'd been tasked with sorting through. As the local library's head archivist, she'd handled countless historical documents, but these were different. These were personal. Her grandmother's passing 3 months ago had left a void that seemed impossible to fill. The grand Victorian house, once alive with the aroma of fresh-baked cookies and the sound of classical music, now stood silent, harboring secrets that had lain dormant for decades. "Take your time going through everything, dear," her mother had said, her voice thick with emotion. "Mom would have wanted you to handle her things." What her mother hadn't mentioned was the weight of responsibility that came with being the keeper of family history. Anna's fingers traced the edge of a bundle of letters, held together by a faded blue ribbon that had once been vibrant. The paper was yellowed, corners softened by time, but the handwriting remained clear, her grandfather's distinctive scrawl, each letter precisely formed despite the passionate words they conveyed. The first few letters were innocuous enough, correspondence about local events, discussions of books, and observations about post-war America. But as Anna delved deeper into the bundle, the tone shifted. Her hands trembled as she unfolded a letter dated June 15, 1962. "My dearest Elizabeth," it began, and Anna's heart stopped. Elizabeth wasn't her grandmother's name. Margaret was. "Last night remains etched in my memory, the way the moonlight caught your hair, the soft touch of your hand against mine. I know we agreed to be careful, but I find myself caring less about consequences with each passing day. The life I've built feels like a carefully constructed facade, and only in your presence do I feel truly alive." Anna's coffee grew cold beside her as she read letter after letter, each one more passionate than the last. Her grandfather, the man she'd idolized, the pillar of the community, the devoted husband and father, had been living a double life. The letters spoke of secret meetings, shared dreams, and plans for a future that never came to be. One name appeared repeatedly in the later letters: Victor. Her grandfather's closest friend, the brilliant architect who had designed half the significant buildings in town, including the library where Anna now worked. Victor, who still lived in the sprawling modernist house on the hill, who had attended every family Christmas dinner until her grandfather's death 5 years ago. "Victor understands," one letter read. "He's the only one who knows the truth about us, about the sacrifice we're making by staying apart. But is it worth it, my love? The thought of growing old without you by my side." The sound of a car door slamming outside startled Anna from her reading. Through the window, she watched as an elegant silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Victor himself emerged, his tall frame still impressive despite his age, silver hair catching the late afternoon sun. Her mother had mentioned she'd asked him to stop by, something about discussing the house's historical preservation status. But now, watching him approach the front door with his characteristic measured stride, Anna felt a surge of anger. He had known. All these years, he had sat at their dinner table, watched her grandmother serve holiday meals, accepted her hospitality, all while keeping her grandfather's secret. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the empty house. Anna gathered the letters, her hands shaking with a mixture of rage and determination. Victor had answers, and she was going to get them, no matter the cost to her childhood memories or her family's carefully maintained image. As she descended the stairs, each step felt like a countdown to an explosion that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. The weight of decades of lies pressed down on her, but beneath the pain, a darker emotion stirred, the desire for truth, regardless of who it might destroy. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Anna took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She was no longer just a librarian, no longer just a granddaughter. She was about to become something else entirely, an avenger of truth, a destroyer of carefully constructed lies. And Victor, standing on the other side of that door, had no idea what was about to hit him. Anna opened the door with such force that Victor took a step back, his composed expression faltering for just a moment. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines around his eyes that widened almost imperceptibly at the sight of the letters in her trembling hands. "Anna," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of years. "You look exactly like Margaret when she was your age." The comparison to her grandmother felt like a slap across her face. "Don't you dare speak her name," Anna hissed, stepping aside to let him enter. "Not until you explain these." She thrust the letters toward him, watching as his professional facade cracked further. Victor moved past her into the house's dimly lit foyer, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. He didn't need to read the letters, the recognition in his eyes told Anna everything. He'd known about them all along. "Your mother mentioned you were sorting through Margaret's things," he said carefully, each word measured. "I didn't expect you to find those quite so quickly." "Quickly?" Anna's laugh was bitter, filling the empty house with its hollow sound. "These letters are over 50 years old, Victor. You've had 50 years to tell the truth. 50 years of Christmas dinners, family gatherings, watching my grandmother serve you coffee while you sat there knowing." "Knowing what?" Victor's voice took on a sharp edge. "What exactly do you think you know based on a handful of old letters?" Anna followed him into the living room, where afternoon light filtered through the heavy curtains her grandmother had hung decades ago. "I know my grandfather was planning to leave us. To leave my grandmother for this Elizabeth." She spat the name like poison. "And you helped him hide it." Victor sank into her grandfather's old leather armchair, a presumptuous choice that made Anna's blood boil. He ran a hand through his silver hair, looking suddenly older than his 75 years. "Your grandfather was my best friend," he said finally. "And yes, he loved Elizabeth. Loved her with the kind of passion that makes sensible men do insensible things. But you're wrong about one thing, Anna. I didn't help him hide it." "The letters mention you specifically," Anna countered, pulling out one dated September 1962. "Right here, Victor understands. He's the only one who knows the truth." "I knew the truth," Victor agreed, his voice growing stronger. "But not in the way you think. I knew because your grandmother told me herself." The revelation hit Anna like a physical blow. She sank onto the sofa, the letters scattered across her lap. "What?" "Margaret knew everything. She knew about Elizabeth, about the plans to leave. She knew about the house your grandfather had bought in her name 3 towns over. She knew about the joint bank account." Victor leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But what your grandfather never knew, what Elizabeth never knew, was that Margaret had discovered it all months before they planned to leave. But they never left. Grandfather stayed until the day he died." Anna's voice was barely a whisper. Victor's laugh was devoid of humor. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Anna. Brilliant, calculating, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting what was hers. She didn't confront your grandfather, didn't cause a scene. Instead, she gathered evidence, built her case like a master strategist. And then? Then what? Then she made sure Elizabeth got a job offer she couldn't refuse, in California. A position at a prestigious university, arranged through connections your grandmother had cultivated for years without anyone knowing. But that was just the beginning." Anna felt the room spin slightly. "What do you mean?" "Your grandmother went to Elizabeth's house one afternoon while your grandfather was at work. I don't know exactly what was said, but I know this: by the end of that conversation, Elizabeth was in tears, and your grandmother had won. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth left for California, and your grandfather never knew why. But the letters, they continued after that." Victor's expression darkened. "Yes, they did. For a while. Until your grandmother made her final move. She went to your grandfather with photographs, evidence of his meetings with Elizabeth, copies of bank statements, everything. She told him if he ever tried to leave, she would ensure he lost everything, his children, his reputation, his architectural practice. In 1962, a scandal like that would have destroyed him completely. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Anna's chest. She blackmailed him. Her own husband. She protected her family, Victor corrected. Or at least, that's how she saw it. Your grandfather stayed, Elizabeth disappeared from his life, and your grandmother kept her perfect family intact. The price was merely a lifetime of quiet desperation. Why are you telling me this now? Anna demanded, rising to her feet. Why didn't you ever say anything before? Victor stood as well, his height still imposing despite his age. Because your grandmother made me promise not to. She knew I was the only one who knew everything, and she made sure I understood the consequences of breaking her confidence. He paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. But she also gave me this, to give to you after she died. He handed Anna a sealed envelope, the paper yellowed with age. Her name was written on it in her grandmother's elegant handwriting. She knew you would find the letters eventually, Victor said softly. She wanted you to understand everything. Anna stared at the envelope, her hands shaking. There's more, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. Victor moved toward the door, his steps heavy. Read the letter, Anna. But remember this, sometimes the people we think we're protecting are the ones we hurt the most. He paused at the threshold. And sometimes, the greatest acts of love look an awful lot like cruelty from the outside. As the door closed behind him, Anna sank back onto the sofa, the envelope burning in her hands like a live coal. The setting sun painted the room in shades of blood and gold, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled. She broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and began to read her grandmother's final confession. The letter slipped from Anna's fingers, floating to the floor like a fallen leaf. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, each revelation more devastating than the last. The setting sun had long since disappeared, leaving her alone in the darkness with nothing but the weight of decades of secrets. My dearest Anna, the letter had begun. If you're reading this, you've already discovered your grandfather's letters to Elizabeth. But what you don't know, what no one but Victor knows, is that Elizabeth was carrying your grandfather's child when I forced her to leave. Anna's hand fumbled for her phone, finding Victor's number in her contacts. Her finger hovered over the call button before pressing it decisively. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. I need to see you, she said, her voice raw. Now. I'll be at my studio, he replied simply, then hung up. 20 minutes later, Anna pulled up to Victor's modernist house on the hill. The structure was a testament to his architectural genius, all clean lines and dramatic angles, softened by the glow of carefully placed lighting. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm interior light. You read it, he said. It wasn't a question. Anna brushed past him into the house, her heels clicking on the polished concrete floors. The space was open, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the town below. On any other night, she might have appreciated the beauty of the design. Tonight, she could barely see straight through her anger. Did you know about the baby? She demanded, turning to face him. Victor moved to a sleek bar cart, pouring 2 fingers of bourbon into crystal tumblers. Yes, he admitted, handing her one. I knew everything. How could you keep this from us? I have an aunt or uncle somewhere out there, maybe cousins. An entire branch of my family tree, hidden because of my grandmother's manipulations. It's more complicated than that, Anna. Victor took a long sip of his drink. Elizabeth lost the baby 3 months after moving to California. The stress, the heartbreak, it was too much. Anna sank onto one of the low-slung leather chairs, the fight draining out of her. Did my grandfather ever know? No. Your grandmother made sure of that. She tracked Elizabeth's life from afar, making sure she never returned, never reached out. It became an obsession for her, maintaining this perfect facade. Why are you telling me all this now? Why did she want me to know? Victor moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the dark glass. Because she was tired, Anna. Tired of the lies, the manipulation, the constant vigilance. In her final years, the guilt ate at her. She saw how you struggled after your divorce, how you withdrew from relationships. She feared her legacy of control and manipulation had affected you more than you knew. Anna stood, moving to stand beside him at the window. The town lights twinkled below like fallen stars. I don't understand what any of this has to do with my divorce. Don't you? Victor turned to face her, suddenly closer than she expected. You married James right out of college, the perfect match your grandmother approved of. But when things got difficult, when he wanted to move to Seattle for his career, you refused to leave. You clung to this town, to your job at the library, to everything familiar and safe. That's not fair, Anna protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? You're more like Margaret than you know. She taught you that love means control, that keeping someone close is more important than their happiness. She watched you repeat her patterns, and it broke her heart. Anna felt tears burning in her eyes. So what am I supposed to do with all this? How do I move forward knowing my entire family history is built on lies? Victor's hand found hers in the darkness, his touch unexpectedly gentle. You learn from it. You break the cycle. His fingers intertwined with hers. You choose a different path. The contact sent electricity through her body, awakening something she'd kept buried for years. She'd always found Victor attractive, had always felt a connection with him that went beyond their family friendship. But now, standing in the darkness with their hands linked, the attraction felt dangerous, almost forbidden. I've watched you for years, Victor said softly, his voice taking on a depth she'd never heard before. Watched you become this brilliant, passionate woman trapped in the same patterns that destroyed your grandparents' marriage. I wanted to tell you the truth so many times, but I was bound by my promise to Margaret. Anna turned to face him fully, their bodies inches apart. And now? What do you want now? The tension between them was palpable, years of unspoken attraction crystallizing in this moment. But before Victor could respond, Anna's phone buzzed with a text message. The screen illuminated with a name that made her blood run cold, Elizabeth. Impossible, she whispered, showing the message to Victor. His face paled as he read the words. I know you found the letters. There's more to the story than Victor is telling you. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the old train station. Come alone. It's time you learned who your grandmother really was. The phone slipped from Anna's trembling fingers, clattering on the floor. Victor reached for her, but she stepped back, her mind racing. You said Elizabeth was gone, that my grandmother made sure she never came back. So who just sent me this message? Victor's expression hardened. Anna, wait. But she was already moving toward the door, her heart pounding. The comfort she'd felt in his presence moments ago had transformed into suspicion. How many more lies were buried in her family's past? And more importantly, who could she trust to tell her the truth? As she drove home through the dark streets, her grandmother's letter seemed to burn in her purse like a live coal. Tomorrow at noon, she would finally learn the whole truth, or walk into a trap that had been 50 years in the making. The old train station loomed before Anna like a monument to faded glory, its Victorian architecture a stark reminder of more elegant times. At precisely noon, she stood on the platform where hundreds of thousands of hellos and goodbyes had been exchanged over the decades. The summer heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, but the trembling in her hands had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd barely slept after leaving Victor's house, her mind racing with possibilities. The text message from Elizabeth felt impossible. Victor had implied she was dead, hadn't he? Or had he carefully worded his responses to mislead without lying outright? The more she thought about their conversation, the more she realized how much had been left unsaid. A train rumbled past on the opposite track, its rushing wind lifting her hair. As it cleared, she saw her, a tall, elegant woman in her 80s, wearing a cream-colored suit that spoke of old money and refined taste. She moved with the kind of grace that age couldn't diminish, her silver hair swept up in a classic style that reminded Anna painfully of her grandmother. "You must be Anna," the woman said, her voice carrying a hint of a southern accent. "You look so much like her." "Elizabeth?" Anna's voice caught in her throat. The woman's smile held a trace of bitterness. "No, dear. My name is Catherine. Elizabeth was my sister." Anna felt the platform tilt beneath her feet. "Was? She died 6 months ago. Cancer." Catherine gestured to a nearby bench. "Shall we sit? There's quite a story to tell, and these old legs aren't what they used to be." They settled onto the weathered wooden bench, the same type that had been there since the station's construction in 1902. Anna noticed Catherine's hands, elegant, but marked with age spots and arthritis, clutching a worn leather portfolio. "Elizabeth made me promise to give you these after she died," Catherine said, opening the portfolio. "She spent decades tracking your family, you see. Gathering information, collecting evidence. It became her life's work after everything happened." "Victor told me she lost the baby," Anna said quietly. Catherine's laugh was sharp and cold. "Is that what he told you?" "Of course it is. Victor has always been very good at telling partial truths." She withdrew a stack of documents from the portfolio. "Your grandmother didn't just threaten to ruin your grandfather's reputation, Anna. She orchestrated one of the most elaborate schemes I've ever encountered." She handed Anna a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1963. The headline read, "Local woman dies in house fire, arson suspected." "That was Elizabeth's house," Catherine said softly. "The one your grandfather bought for her. It burned to the ground one night while she was supposedly inside. The body was burned beyond recognition, but dental records confirmed it was her. Your grandmother had very powerful friends in the police department." Anna's hands shook as she read the article. But if Elizabeth wasn't in the house? She was already in California by then, hidden away in a private hospital. Your grandmother had arranged everything, the job offer, the new identity, even the fake death certificate. But she didn't do it to protect your grandfather's reputation. She did it to protect herself. Catherine pulled out another document, this one a faded letter written in her grandmother's precise handwriting. "You see, your grandmother had secrets of her own. Long before your grandfather ever met Elizabeth, Margaret had been embezzling money from the library's foundation. Small amounts at first, then larger sums as she grew bolder. When your grandfather fell in love with Elizabeth and planned to leave, Margaret knew a divorce would mean a full audit of the family's finances." "That's impossible," Anna protested. "My grandmother was the most honest person I knew." "The most careful person you knew," Catherine corrected. "She built her reputation on propriety and morality precisely because it was the perfect cover. The money she stole, nearly $500,000 over 15 years, went into private accounts that she used to fund her manipulation of Elizabeth's life. Every job offer, every roadblock, every piece of evidence she gathered against your grandfather, it was all paid for with stolen money." Anna felt bile rising in her throat. "And Victor? What was his role in all this?" Catherine's expression hardened. "Victor was in love with your grandmother. Had been since they were young. He helped her with everything, the fake death, the financial cover-up, even monitoring Elizabeth in California. His architectural firm was just a front for laundering the stolen money." The truth hit Anna like a physical blow. Last night's intimate moment with Victor took on a sinister new light. Had he been manipulating her just as he'd helped manipulate Elizabeth? "There's more," Catherine said, pulling out a final envelope. "Elizabeth wasn't the only one who had your grandfather's child." Anna's heart stopped. "What? Your grandmother was pregnant when she orchestrated Elizabeth's disappearance. But the baby wasn't your grandfather's." Catherine's eyes met Anna's steadily. It was Victor's. The sound of another passing train drowned out Anna's gasp of shock. When the noise faded, Catherine continued, her voice gentle but relentless. The child was given up for adoption immediately after birth. Your grandmother used her connections to seal the records, but Elizabeth found him. His name is James. James? Anna felt the world spinning. My James? My ex-husband? Catherine nodded slowly. Your grandmother arranged your meeting in college. She wanted to keep him close, to watch over him without revealing the truth. When he started pushing for you to move to Seattle, she panicked. She couldn't risk losing control of both of you. Anna stood abruptly, her legs unsteady. This is insane. You're lying. All of this, it's impossible. Check the DNA records Elizabeth gathered, Catherine said, handing her a USB drive. Check the financial records. Everything you need to verify the truth is right here. She stood, straightening her cream suit. Elizabeth wanted you to know everything before you got too close to Victor. History has a way of repeating itself in your family, it seems. As Catherine walked away, her heels clicking on the platform, Anna clutched the portfolio of evidence to her chest. Her phone buzzed, another message from Victor asking to see her. But now, looking at his name on the screen, she felt only revulsion. She had thought finding her grandfather's letters was devastating. But this was an earthquake that had destroyed the very foundation of her world. And somewhere in the rubble lay the truth about who she really was, and who she might become. The station clock struck 1, its deep tone echoing across the empty platform. Anna had 1 hour before her afternoon shift at the library. 1 hour to decide whether to confront Victor with what she knew, or to play along and see how deep the deception really went. Either way, she knew with bone-deep certainty that by sunset, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The library's basement archive felt different now. Anna sat at her desk, surrounded by the carefully preserved records of other people's lives, while her own family's secrets burned in her bag like radioactive material. The USB drive Catherine had given her lay connected to her computer, its contents devastating in their methodical documentation. Bank statements. Police reports. Birth certificates. DNA test results. Elizabeth had spent decades building a case that would destroy not just her grandmother's reputation, but the entire carefully constructed facade of the town's most respected family. Another text from Victor lit up her phone, "We need to talk. Please." It was his 5th message since the train station. She left it unanswered, just like the others. Instead, she opened the library's financial records from her grandmother's tenure. Everything looked perfect on the surface, too perfect. But now that she knew what to look for, she could see the pattern. Small discrepancies in the annual reports, donations that didn't quite add up, grants that were recorded but never quite made it to their intended projects. Her grandmother had been brilliant, Anna had to give her that. The manipulation went beyond money. She'd used her position to build a network of influence, collecting favors and secrets like others collected rare books. The power she'd wielded had been built on a foundation of mutual blackmail and shared guilt. Ms. Harrison. Linda, one of the junior librarians, appeared at her door. "Mr. Laurent is here to see you." Anna's heart rate spiked, but years of maintaining a professional facade served her well. "Tell him I'm in a meeting." "Actually, tell him I'll be in meetings all day." Linda hesitated. "He said it's about your grandmother's estate." "Something about the house title?" "Of course." He would use that angle to force a meeting. Anna took a deep breath, weighing her options. "Fine. Give me 5 minutes, then send him down." The moment Linda left, Anna began moving quickly. She copied key files from Elizabeth's USB drive to a secure cloud account, then removed the drive and slipped it into a hollow book, an old trick her grandmother had taught her, now tainted with new meaning. She pulled up the security camera feeds on her second monitor. The basement archives had been her domain for 5 years, and she knew every corner, every exit, every blind spot. Knowledge that would prove useful very soon. When Victor's tall frame appeared on the security feed, walking down the basement stairs, Anna felt an odd sense of calm settle over her. She had been raised by a master manipulator, trained in the art of control without even knowing it. Now it was time to put those lessons to use. Anna. Victor filled her doorway, his silver hair slightly disheveled, the first crack in his usually impeccable appearance. "You're not answering my calls." "I've been busy." She gestured to the files spread across her desk. "Lot of estate paperwork to go through." He moved into the office, closing the door behind him. The space felt suddenly smaller, more confined. "Who did you meet at the train station?" So he'd had her followed. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Catherine sends her regards." The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. Fear, quickly masked by concern. "Anna, whatever she told you. Was it worth it?" Anna interrupted, her voice deadly calm. "Helping my grandmother destroy Elizabeth's life? Watching your own son grow up from a distance? Or was that part of the thrill, arranging my marriage to him, playing God with our lives just like she did?" Victor sank into the chair across from her desk, his face ashen. "You don't understand. Margaret and I had a child together. Embezzled money. Faked a death. Manipulated and blackmailed an entire town. Did I miss anything?" Anna's laugh was bitter. "Oh right, then you helped set up your own son with your lover's granddaughter. That's quite a legacy, Victor." "Everything we did was to protect the family," he said quietly. "To protect you?" "No." Anna stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Everything you did was to protect yourselves. Your reputations. Your power. Your secrets." She moved around the desk, leaning against it to face him directly. "But now I have all of Elizabeth's evidence. Every document, every paper trail, every dirty little secret she spent decades uncovering." Victor's hand twitched toward his pocket, reaching for his phone, she guessed. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them. Anna smiled, and for the first time, she saw real fear in Victor's eyes. It was her grandmother's smile, the one she'd seen in old photos, the smile of a woman who held all the cards. "I want a meeting," she said softly. "Tomorrow night. You're going to call every member of the library board, every person my grandmother ever blackmailed, everyone who helped cover up her crimes. Tell them it's about the estate, about the future of the library foundation. Tell them whatever you need to get them there." "And then what?" Anna moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then we're going to play a game my grandmother taught me without even knowing it. A game about power, and secrets, and what people will do to keep them hidden." She straightened up, smoothing her skirt. 7 p.m., at the house. Don't be late." She paused at the door, looking back at him. "Oh, and Victor. Call James. Tell him his birth father would like to finally meet him properly." The look of absolute devastation on Victor's face should have given her satisfaction. Instead, she felt only a deep, aching sadness for the web of lies that had entangled 3 generations of her family. As she watched Victor leave on the security feed, his shoulders slumped in defeat, Anna began drafting emails to the local press. Tomorrow night, the carefully maintained facade of the town's elite would finally crack. But first, she had one more stop to make. She gathered her things, including the hollow book containing Elizabeth's USB drive, and headed for the cemetery. It was time to have one final conversation with her grandmother, and to let her know that her granddaughter had learned her lessons all too well. The grand Victorian house had never felt more alive than it did at 7 o'clock that evening. Cars lined the street, expensive vehicles belonging to the town's most prominent citizens. Through the windows, shadows moved like actors preparing for the final act of a tragic play. Anna stood in her grandmother's study, watching the last of the guests arrive. She'd spent the afternoon arranging the room exactly as her grandmother would have, drinks laid out on the antique sidebar, comfortable chairs arranged in a semicircle, and most importantly, a projector screen pulled down over the fireplace. Victor arrived last, as she knew he would. He'd always had a flair for dramatic entrances. But this time, he wasn't alone. James stood beside him, looking exactly as Anna remembered from their marriage, tall, handsome, and completely unaware of how thoroughly his life had been manipulated. Their eyes met across the room, and Anna felt a surge of emotions she couldn't quite name. Ex-husband. Step-brother. Victim. Just like her. "Thank you all for coming," Anna addressed the room, her voice steady. The crowd quieted, board members, business owners, politicians, all linked by decades of shared secrets. "I'm sure Victor told you this meeting was about the Library Foundation's future." In a way, he was right. She clicked the projector remote. The first image appeared, a bank statement from 1962, showing a series of suspicious transfers. This is where it began. My grandmother's first embezzlement from the library funds. Murmurs rippled through the room. The bank president, Thomas Wheeler, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Don't worry, Thomas. We'll get to your role in covering up those transactions soon enough." Anna clicked to the next slide, a police report about Elizabeth's supposed death. "Chief Roberts, I believe your father was instrumental in falsifying this death certificate." The police chief's face reddened. "Now see here. Or perhaps we should discuss the real reason the Historical Society suddenly approved all of Victor's building projects." Another click, another document. It's amazing what people will do when they're being blackmailed with evidence of tax fraud. The room had gone deathly quiet. Anna moved through the evidence methodically, watching faces pale as decades of corruption were laid bare. But she saved the most devastating revelation for last. "And finally, we come to you, Father." She turned to face Victor, watching him flinch at the word. "Would you like to tell James the truth, or should I?" James stood up, confusion etched on his face. "What's going on?" "Victor, what is she talking about?" "He can't tell you," Anna said softly. "Just like he couldn't tell you when he arranged our chance meeting in college. Or when he watched you grow up from a distance, too much of a coward to claim his own son." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. James staggered, reaching for a chair to steady himself. "What?" Anna clicked one final time, displaying the DNA test results Elizabeth had obtained. "My grandmother wasn't the only one with secrets. She and Victor had an affair that resulted in a child, you, James. Then they gave you up for adoption, only to manipulate you back into their web years later. They played God with all our lives. That's enough." Victor surged to his feet. "You have no right." "I have every right." Anna's voice cracked like a whip. "You and my grandmother stole my right to know my own family history. You stole James's right to know his father. You stole Elizabeth's right to live her life freely." She addressed the whole room now. "You all collaborated in decades of lies and manipulation, thinking your secrets would stay buried forever. But Elizabeth spent the last years of her life gathering evidence, preparing for this moment." She lifted a stack of manila envelopes from her grandmother's desk. "Inside these envelopes is every piece of evidence I've shown you tonight, ready to be delivered to state investigators, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the region." She began distributing them. Unless what?" Thomas Wheeler's voice shook. "Unless you do exactly what I ask." Anna smiled, not her grandmother's smile of power, but something gentler. "The Library Foundation will be restructured. All of you will resign your positions. The foundation's funds will be audited, and every penny my grandmother stole will be repaid, with interest. Those funds will establish a new scholarship program in Elizabeth's name. She turned to Victor. You will sign a confession admitting to your role in Elizabeth's disappearance and the financial fraud. It will remain sealed as long as you step down from all public positions and transfer majority ownership of your firm to James, if he wants it. The room erupted in protests and negotiations, but Anna held up her hand. This isn't a negotiation. You have until midnight to sign the papers my lawyer is drawing up. Choose to fight me, and I'll destroy everything you've built, just like you destroyed Elizabeth's life. She walked to James, who stood shell-shocked by the revelations. I'm sorry, she said softly. I found out yesterday. I couldn't let them keep lying to us. James looked at Victor, his father, with a mixture of anger and loss. All those years. We can't change the past, Anna said, touching his arm gently. But we can stop the cycle. We can choose to be better than they were. By midnight, every document was signed. The old guard had crumbled, not with a bang but with the quiet scratch of pens on paper. As the last car drove away, Anna stood on the porch of her grandmother's house, now her house, and felt the weight of generations of secrets finally lifting. Victor was the last to leave. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at her. You're more like her than you know, he said quietly. No, Anna replied. I'm not. She used her power to destroy lives. I'm using mine to set people free. She smiled, and this time it was entirely her own. Goodbye, Victor. Later that night, Anna sat in her grandmother's study, now stripped of its secrets, and opened her laptop. A blank document waited, cursor blinking. She began to type. Dear Elizabeth. Your sister gave me your letters, and now I understand why you wanted me to know the truth. But I've chosen a different path than revenge. Instead of burying the secrets deeper, I'm setting them free. Maybe that's the only way to break the legacy of lies that shaped our family. Your great-nephew James is coming to terms with his true identity. The money has been returned. The truth is out. And I think, perhaps, this is what justice really looks like, not the satisfaction of revenge, but the peace that comes with finally facing the truth. Rest well, knowing that your life's work helped set us all free. With love. Anna. She closed the laptop and looked out the window at the town below. Tomorrow, the newspapers would announce the restructuring of the library foundation. There would be whispers, of course, but the truth had a way of being kinder than lies in the long run. On her desk lay her grandfather's letters to Elizabeth, next to the new key to her office at the library. The past and the future, side by side. Anna touched both gently, then turned out the light. In the darkness, she could almost hear her grandmother's voice, not the voice of power and manipulation, but the voice she remembered from childhood, reading stories about heroes and redemption. Sometimes, she realized, the greatest act of revenge is choosing not to become what hurt you. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in the quiet of the night, Anna had finally found her own truth. She was neither her grandmother's revenge nor her grandfather's redemption. She was, at last, simply herself.